Hey there. Tonight's story isn't about dragons or empires. It's about women. Not queens or warriors, just women who trembled, who whispered, who went unheard. A girl in ancient Athens, too afraid to breathe. A duchess in Florence, silent beneath velvet. A patient on a couch in Vienna, learning that words could heal, or harm. This story doesn't roar. It lingers. It aches. It waits in quiet rooms and behind closed doors. So if slow-burning truths and soft revolutions help you drift off, you're in the right place. Settle in. Let the world hush. And follow me through the centuries of silence that were never really empty. Close your eyes. And listen. The flickering light of an oil lamp dances across the rough-hewn stone walls. Outside, the cicadas scream in the heavy Athenian night, their sound rising and falling like a restless tide. Inside, the air hangs thick with heat and the sharp sting of burnt time. A woman sits hunched on a low cot, knees pulled tightly to her chest, bare feet pressed into the cold clay floor. Her eyes are wide, unfocused, caught somewhere between now and never. She does not speak. She hardly breathes. And still, her body betrays her. Her heart pounds too fast. Her chest tightens without warning. Her hands tremble. Her throat constricts as if gripped by invisible fingers. The priest healer watches her from the shadows, his brow furrowed in dramatic contemplation. After a few moments of theatrical silence, he speaks. The womb, he says gravely, has wandered. She does not respond. She has heard these words before. It is 400 BCE. And her fate was decided long before her symptoms began. According to the revered teachings of Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, the female womb is not anchored. It is wild, wayward, and unstable. It roams the body, searching for fulfillment and purpose like an animal out of place. When a woman's emotions become too strong, when her passions go unmet, when her body is denied the heat of intimacy or the nourishment of childbirth, the womb takes offense. And it moves. Upward. Downward. Sideways. Wherever it pleases. This woman's dread, they say, is not born of grief or memory or fear. It is a biological mutiny. Her uterus has floated too close to her lungs, pressing in, squeezing out the air. Her panic is not psychological, it is mechanical. Her shaking hands, her sleepless nights, her choking gasps in the dark, these are not cries for help, but symptoms of poor uterine discipline. And so, the cure begins. A brazier is lit. Herbs are thrown into the flames, pungent ones first, asafoetida, pitch, rancid garlic. The smoke is forced toward her face, acrid and eye-watering, meant to repel the womb from its high perch. Then come the fragrant offerings, myrrh, rose petals, sweet olive resin, burned near her thighs to lure the organ back to its rightful place. No one asks about her husband. No one wonders if he returns home drunk and angry. No one considers the silence of her home since her infant died last winter, or the bruises she no longer bothers to hide. No one speaks of the night she woke from sleep with a scream caught in her throat and couldn't say why. No. The only question is where the womb has gone, and how to trick it into returning. This is what medicine looks like when the soul is ignored. When a woman's mind is a mystery too inconvenient to explore. when the body becomes a riddle solved by smoke and speculation. The priest-physician chants softly. The shadows on the walls stretch and twist with the firelight. Somewhere outside, a dog barks once and falls silent. The woman stares straight ahead, the tears in her eyes reflecting the flame, not out of pain, but because the smoke will not let her blink. She has no name here. Only a role, the fragile vessel. The troubled wife. The patient whose womb refuses to obey. And so begins the silence. Because when the diagnosis is rooted in myth, the story cannot grow truth. It is stunted from the start. The Greeks had words for geometry, democracy, tragedy, but none for trauma. They had gods for war, wisdom, wine, but none for sorrow that hides behind the ribs and won't let go. Still, women in ancient Greece carried their pain. They carried it in their breath, their bones, their blood. They whispered it to each other in courtyards and temples, behind veils and columns, when the men weren't listening. They learned to speak without speaking, to nod when accused, to smile when dismissed, to shrink when observed. They learned, above all, that survival meant compliance. And as the smoke curls toward the rafters and the priest mutters prayers to logic and gods alike, the woman on the cot does not speak. Her lungs burn. Her chest aches. But she does not move. The womb, they say, must return willingly. But her pain is not a wandering organ. It is memory. It is loss. It is everything no one bothered to name. Centuries pass. The marble cracks. The language shifts. And still, the silence follows. Now it is Rome. The streets are louder here, cobbled roads thundering under chariot wheels, merchants shouting over crates of figs and amphorae of oil. In the villa of a senator, high above the noise, a woman sits by a window carved in the shape of a goddess. Her eyes are dry. Her face still. But her hands tremble in her lap, hidden beneath folds of finely spun linen. Her name is Livia. She is 34 years old. And she is not well. She wakes in the night with racing thoughts she cannot quiet. Her stomach knots for no reason. She flinches at loud sounds. Some days, her heart races with no battle near. Some days, she stares at the wall for hours, unable to move. Her physician calls it suffocation. Not an illness. A disturbance. Not a sickness of the soul. A disruption of the humors. He believes the air inside her is unbalanced. That she holds too much moisture, or not enough heat. That her womb, like her Greek ancestors, remains a mischievous thing, damp, fickle, and ever ready to misbehave. He prescribes a purge. Not of guilt. Not of sorrow. But of fluids. Livia is led to a dark chamber scented with mint and myrtle. There, women of lesser rank prepare the instruments, long glass tubes, warmed oils, scented pastes. She is not touched cruelly. But neither is she comforted. A slow stream of oil is introduced into her body. A warm compress is placed over her abdomen. The physician speaks in measured tones about balance, flow, the nature of female temperament. He quotes Galen. He smiles as he reminds her, too much thinking can boil the blood. Livia does not respond. She is the wife of a public man. Her silence is her role. But deep inside her, something clenches. She has lost 2 children. The second, a boy, lived only 9 days. Since then, her appetite has vanished. Her dreams are restless. Her laughter, once loud and golden, has turned to a soft echo she no longer trusts. No one asks about the dreams. No one dares mention the baby's room, still perfectly prepared, still untouched. What matters is that she does not faint in public. That she smiles at banquets. That she appears well. Rome demands masks, not truth. The physicians speak with elegance and certainty. Their methods are honed, their tools polished. And yet, they still treat the body as a machine with pipes and balances, fluids and fires. The mind remains a shadow, acknowledged only when it causes disruption. And so, the woman is flushed. She is perfumed. She is ordered to bathe more often, to take walks in gardens, to avoid poetry. Her husband is told she should be made pregnant again, quickly, before the womb forgets its duties. Grief is not named. Anxiety is not a word. There are no scrolls for quiet panic, for the ache of absence, for the way a mother's arms can feel heavy with nothing at all. In the library of Celsus, 1,000 scrolls describe wounds, fevers, plagues. They name every nerve and tendon, every muscle of the gladiator and soldier. But there is no record of the hollow behind the ribs that opens when love disappears. Livia sits by the window long after the physician leaves. The oil cools. Her dress is restored. Her hair rebraided. The sky dims from bronze to violet. Below, a flute player begins to play near the fountain, his melody light and careless. She does not move. She is not cured. She is contained. In Rome, a woman's suffering must be sculpted into elegance. Even her pain must be graceful. Her tears, if they come, must do so alone, behind thick curtains, where no citizen can see the crack in the marble. And so the silence deepens. It slips between the columns and the candle flames, nestles in the folds of fine cloth, and waits. It waits as physicians chart humors and men debate philosophy. It waits while women stare from windows, wishing someone would ask not what ails them, but who they've lost. What they fear. Why they can no longer sleep. Livia closes her eyes. She does not dream. She does not scream. She simply lets the dark come. It is easier than explaining what she does not have the words to say. The bells of the monastery toll 7 times before dawn. A pale mist clings to the earth like breath held too long. Inside the cloistered walls of St. Agatha's convent, candles flicker in silent alcoves. The stone floor is cold beneath bare feet. And somewhere behind a heavy wooden door, a woman screams. She does not use words. Only sound, raw, torn from the gut, unfiltered by language. Her voice cracks. Her limbs convulse. Her eyes roll back. And around her, the sisters of mercy kneel and pray. She is not mad, they insist. She is afflicted. And they know the cause. The devil. It is the 12th century. A world of relics and incense, saints and miracles, sin and salvation. Where sickness is a trial. Where suffering is a test. Where women's bodies are seen as both sacred vessels and dangerous gates, openings through which evil may creep. The woman on the floor, her name lost to parchment, has been trembling for weeks. She speaks in voices not her own. She claims to see shadows where none stand. She wakes at night gasping, clutching her chest, whispering of a hand pressing her down, of eyes that never blink. The sisters called for a priest. The priest called for a relic. Now she lies on the ground, a silver cross pressed to her brow, holy water flung in frantic arcs across the chamber. Psalms fill the air like weapons. Latin words meant to cleanse, to drive out, to command. But no one asks, what happened to her before the trembling began? No one wonders what grief she carries. What man she feared. What wound she swallowed whole. Instead, they chart her symptoms like signs, unnatural laughter, twitching fingers, sudden tears. These are not responses to life's weight. These are portents. Evidence. Proof of Satan's schemes. And so the treatment begins. Fasting. Cold baths. Repetition of sacred verses until her throat bleeds. Sometimes, isolation. Sometimes, touch, hard, urgent, meant to purge through pain. Sometimes, silence. Sometimes, song. At first, she resists. Then she submits. Eventually, she begins to call herself what they call her. Possessed. Hysterical. Tainted. She believes it is the devil who rides her chest each night. That her fear is not memory, but malice. That her panic is not grief, but punishment. Because when the only framework offered is spiritual, all pain becomes a question of worthiness. Did she pray hard enough? Confess deeply enough? Suffer well enough? In the cloisters of medieval Europe, female suffering is often seen as holy, or heretical. There is little space in between. A woman who weeps too long is suspect. One who refuses food may be a saint. One who speaks too boldly may be a witch. And the line between spiritual ecstasy and psychological agony is perilously thin. Outside, the world is no kinder. Midwives are arrested for witchcraft when a birth goes wrong. Widows are feared for their independence. Women who grieve too loudly may find themselves on a pyre, their sorrow mistaken for sorcery. So, many learn to keep their pain quiet. Neatly folded beneath their veils and prayers. They speak to saints in whispers. They tuck their shaking hands into sleeves. They look down. The woman in the convent eventually quiets. Her fits grow less frequent. Her eyes regain focus. The sisters call it healing. A miracle, even. They thank the relic. They thank the saints. But the truth is more haunting. She has learned to be still. To not speak of the nights her breath caught in her throat. Of the hands that once touched without permission. Of the loss that tore a hole in her and left no name behind. She lights candles now. She sings in the chapel. Her voice is soft. Her smile polite. But inside, the silence hums, like a string pulled tight but never released. And so the story continues. The diagnosis changes. The theology shifts. But the woman remains alone with her fear, her sorrow dressed in borrowed words, her truth translated into doctrines she never chose. The devil, they said, once lived in her. But perhaps it was simply pain. unseen, unnamed, waiting for someone to listen. The bells of the monastery toll 7 times before dawn. Pale mist rolls over the hills like breath held too long. Inside the thick stone walls of St. Agatha's convent, silence hangs heavy, broken only by the soft rustle of linen and the rhythm of whispered prayers. The world is damp with cold and ritual. Time does not pass here, it loops, like a rosary bead slipping again and again beneath a calloused thumb. And somewhere beyond the chapel, behind a heavy wooden door, a woman screams. Not from pain of the body. Not from wound or fire. But from something deeper, darker, older than language. She does not speak, not in any way the sisters understand. Her voice has become fractured, sharp with sudden cries, guttural syllables, and laughter that echoes off stone in a tone no one wants to hear. Her hands twist into claws, her back arches like a bow. When she is still, her eyes stare wide into nothing. When she moves, she shakes as though the cold has reached her bones. But it is not the cold. They say it is the devil. It is the 12th century. Europe is cloaked in incense and scripture, in relics and punishments. The Church reigns not only over souls but over thoughts. To be unwell is not to be broken, it is to be sinful. And a woman, especially, must be watched closely, for her body is both fragile vessel and possible door, a gateway for grace or possession, depending on her obedience. The afflicted woman, her name already reduced to a nickname in the convent's registry, had once been a novice. Quiet, dutiful, often found alone in the garden, eyes fixed on the sky as if asking it questions no one else dared voice. But then came the change. First, her silence deepened. Then, her tremors began. She refused food. She stopped sleeping. She began to mutter in her cell. She clutched her chest at night as if drowning on dry land. And when one sister found her convulsing on the chapel floor, eyes rolled back, a cross fell from the altar. That was all it took. Now she is not sick. She is possessed. The abbess does not hesitate. A message is sent to the local bishop. A traveling priest is summoned. He arrives with holy oil, a weathered Bible, and a pouch containing a fragment of St. Agatha's rib, sealed in glass and gold. He carries it like a sword. She is restrained. Not with ropes, but with hands and hymns. The other nuns kneel and pray, their voices rising and falling like waves of mercy or fear. Psalms are recited. Salt is sprinkled across the floor. The relic is pressed to her brow. She hisses and thrashes, not from evil, but from terror. The priest calls it resistance. The abbess calls it a test. The others call it cleansing. No one asks what happened to her before the fits began. No one asks about her past. About the man who brought her to the convent gate and left without a name. About the bruises she tried to hide beneath her sleeves. About the child she carried for only a few months, then lost in silence. No one wonders if her screams are the sound of grief that had nowhere else to go. In this world, pain must be labeled quickly, then punished or sanctified. So, she is purified. Bathed in freezing water. Forbidden to speak except in prayer. Denied bread. Given relics to kiss. And when her episodes continue, she is isolated, placed in a cell with only a cross, a stool, and a small window high above her head. She speaks now only in whispers, and even then, only to saints. The line between healing and control blurs. To be cured in this place means to conform, to quiet, to obey. Her symptoms are logged by the sisters. Tremors, unnatural laughter, nighttime visions, refusal to eat, sudden weeping. All carefully documented as evidence of spiritual affliction. Each one a stone laid on a path toward sainthood, or the stake. They forget she once painted icons. That her hands once held a brush steadier than they ever held a knife. That she once told another novice, in hushed tones, about dreams where she flew over fields of lavender, far from the cloister, far from the ache behind her ribs. Now, she does not dream. Now, she closes her eyes only to escape the light. The Church leaves little room for ambiguity. A woman either suffers nobly, and thus becomes holy, or resists, and becomes a warning. There is no third path. No diagnosis of sorrow. No vocabulary for trauma. No space for the complicated geometry of inner pain. And so, history will record her as a case. A miracle. A lesson. The woman will remain here, tucked into footnotes of monastic chronicles. Her name will be forgotten, but her affliction will be remembered. Other women will come after her, shaking, sobbing, whispering, and the Church will continue to offer its answer. Prayer. Discipline. Exorcism. None will be asked who touched them without consent. None will be asked what they lost. None will be told their fear makes sense. Outside the cloister, the mist begins to burn away. The sun rises over tiled rooftops and dark fields. A cock crows. Somewhere, a child laughs. Life continues. Inside, she kneels before the altar. Her hands no longer tremble. Her face is serene. But not peaceful. She has learned the rules. And now she plays her part. Florence gleams beneath a golden sky. The Arno glides through the city like a ribbon of light, and every arch, dome, and marble column seems to declare, this is the age of reason. Knowledge blooms in academies. Oil paintings stare back with impossible depth. Anatomy is sketched in precise lines by candlelight. The world is opening. But not for her. Behind the brocade curtains of a high-born chamber, a young duchess lies in bed, unblinking. Her skin is pale as porcelain, her lips chapped, her hands clenched into fists. She has not spoken in days. She has not eaten. The healers hover, uncomfortable, paging through thick volumes bound in velvet and gold. The stars are favorable. Her humors are balanced. Her pulse is steady. And still, something is wrong. Her name is Isabetta, and she is 16. The daughter of a powerful Florentine family, she was married last spring to a nobleman nearly twice her age. The wedding was a spectacle, trumpets, roses, silks from the east. She did not cry. She did not smile. She performed. Now, barely a year later, she lies in this room with the shutters drawn, her world narrowed to the creak of floorboards and the whispers behind tapestries. The court physician has ruled out plague. Her body bears no wounds. Her breath comes slow but steady. Still, her eyes stare into something no one else can see. He writes a name in his journal, hysteria. It is a word reborn in the Renaissance. Once a vague idea in Hippocratic scrolls, now repolished with the authority of new science. A disorder of women, born from the uterus and spread through nerves. It causes fainting, melancholy, tremors, seizures, silence. It is everything they cannot explain. Her mother kneels at her bedside, weeping. Her husband stands at the foot of the bed, arms folded. He is embarrassed. This was not the bargain he agreed to. He wanted a wife, not a mystery. He insists she be treated. And so they begin. Cupping. Leeches. Bleeding. Oils heated and rubbed into her temples. A tincture of valerian. Then another. Still, she does not move. Finally, the midwife is summoned. Not to deliver a child, but to restore the womb, which, once again, is accused of wandering. Perfumed cloths are pressed to her face and her thighs. Vines are boiled in wine and applied with trembling hands. She does not resist. But she does not respond. They speak over her as if she is not there. Perhaps she reads too much. Perhaps she is spoiled. Perhaps she desired someone else. No one asks what happened on her wedding night. No one wonders if the bruises on her arms were caused by fear. No one thinks to ask what she feels. Because a woman's pain must always have a reason, preferably one that does not threaten power. At court, Isabetta is now a subject of gossip. She's mad, say the ladies. She's possessed, say the priests. She's bored, says her husband, who now spends his evenings with an opera singer half her age. Behind closed doors, some whisper that her silence is strategic. That it is a refusal. A rebellion without words. That madness may be the only escape route left to a girl with no door. Because she cannot flee. Because she cannot speak. Because if she shouts the truth, no one will believe her. And so, she floats, between diagnosis and disinterest, between a science that dissects and a society that shrugs. Her body is fed by servants. Her hair is brushed. Her eyes remain empty. But her mind? It moves. She remembers being a child in the garden, pressing her fingers into the dirt to feel the pulse of the earth. She remembers watching her father draw constellations on parchment, telling her stories of gods and monsters in the stars. She remembers laughter. She remembers possibility. She remembers the moment it ended, when she was told her marriage had been arranged, and that her duty was not to think, but to comply. And so now she lies in silence. Not because she is gone, but because she was never invited to stay. In the salons of Florence, Da Vinci sketches flying machines. In Rome, Michelangelo sculpts prophets in marble. The world celebrates genius. But the genius of a frightened girl, how she folds her terror into silence, how she survives without speaking, is ignored. Isabetta's name will not appear in history books. But her story will be repeated, in palace after palace, under chandelier and candlelight, in chamber and cell. Because in every golden age, there is a shadow. And in every masterpiece, there is a frame that hides what no one wanted to see. London, 1753. The air is thick with coal smoke and certainty. Enlightenment has arrived, or so the gentlemen in powdered wigs declare. Progress shines in every invention, every printed pamphlet, every flick of a surgeon's scalpel. The age of superstition is over. Reason reigns. And yet, in a modest townhouse near Covent Garden, a young woman sits by the window, staring blankly into the rainy dusk. Her name is Margaret. She is 27. Married. Educated. Ill. The physicians do not agree on what exactly afflicts her. Some say melancholia. Others call it a nervous disorder. The word hysteria floats like smoke from their lips, familiar, useful, vague. She has become a case, a curiosity. Not a person. Her symptoms shift. One day, her hands tremble so violently she cannot hold a quill. The next, she lies in bed for hours, unable to move, not from pain, but from something deeper. Something invisible. Her heart races. Her breath shortens. At night, she wakes gasping, as though drowning in her own chest. Her husband is patient, at first. He brings her the newest publications from the Royal Society. He introduces her to a physician rumored to be a genius in the emerging field of neurology. The man arrives with a silver-tipped cane and eyes that gleam with theory. He listens for an hour, nodding slowly. Then he explains. Her nerves are overstimulated. Her mind too fragile. Her lifestyle, too intellectual. He recommends rest. Not simply quiet, but seclusion. No books. No writing. No conversation that could provoke thought. The brain, he says, is like a muscle. It must not be overused. Especially not by women. And so Margaret is confined to a room on the upper floor of her house. The curtains are drawn. The furniture is removed. Even the mirror is taken down, lest she overexert her imagination. A maid brings bland food and tepid tea. The hours stretch like pale thread. She begins to count things. The knots in the floorboards. The flickers of the candle. The sighs of the maid. Her world narrows to four walls and the thoughts she is not allowed to express. And then comes the next stage of treatment. Electrotherapy. The doctor returns, this time with a brass machine that hums and crackles with promise. Electricity, he says, is the future. It can reset the nervous system. It can cure hysteria. He attaches wires to her wrists and turns the crank. Her fingers twitch. Her jaw clenches. She does not scream. She does not weep. But her eyes never leave his. He calls it improvement. She calls it endurance. Later, he prescribes laudanum to ease the aftershocks. She takes it without protest. Her limbs grow heavy. Her thoughts blur at the edges. The world becomes soft, fogged, distant. But even in the fog, she remembers. She remembers reading Wollstonecraft under candlelight, heart quickening at the words, "I do not wish them, women, to have power over men, but over themselves." She remembers writing essays under a false name. Publishing thoughts she was never supposed to have. Feeling, for a brief moment, like she was more than a patient or a wife. And now she is here. Quiet. Obedient. Still. The doctor brings her progress reports to her husband. They are optimistic. She is calmer now. Less agitated. Her episodes have lessened. He says the treatment is working. The science is sound. But Margaret knows the truth. She has simply stopped speaking. Because every time she opened her mouth, they mistook her clarity for madness. Her sadness for weakness. Her intelligence for illness. And so now she drifts. Between sedation and silence. Between numbness and night. The Enlightenment claims to banish darkness. But in rooms like hers, the shadows only become more elegant, shaped like reason, scented with logic, wrapped in the velvet of authority. There is no devil here. No wandering womb. No saints or relics. Only volts and tonics, wires and willpower. Only Margaret, watching the rain draw lines down the window pane like a language she's no longer allowed to read. She does not scream. She does not move. But if you look closely, her fingers still twitch, tracing invisible sentences across her lap, over and over again. A woman's thoughts, still burning, even in silence. London, 1861. A black veil drapes the empire. Queen Victoria, cloaked in grief, retreats from the world. Her beloved Albert is dead. The newspapers spill with tributes, but the real mourning happens behind closed doors, in dim parlors, behind lace curtains, under layers of bombazine and ritual. For every widow in Britain, the Queen's sorrow becomes law. Mourning is not a feeling. It is a practice. And for some, it becomes a sentence. In a narrow townhouse in Kensington, Eleanor Wren folds a crepe veil over her face and adjusts her gloves. Her fingers tremble. It has been 9 months since her husband's sudden death, a cough that turned to fever that turned to silence. The doctor called it consumption. The neighbors called it tragic. But now they call her something else. Fragile. Strange. Unwell. She has followed every mourning custom to the letter. Full black dress. No social visits. Only piano music in minor keys. She covers all mirrors in the house, just as the manual prescribes. Grief, after all, should not be tempted by vanity. But she cannot stop the dreams. Every night, she wakes gasping, his name still wet on her lips. Her chest feels tight, as if something heavy is pressing from the inside. Her hands go numb. Sometimes her vision blurs, and the world tilts. She tells her sister-in-law, trembling, "It feels like I'm dying." Her sister-in-law calls a doctor. He arrives with gold-rimmed spectacles and a cane made of polished ash. He listens, briefly. Takes her pulse. Asks nothing about the months she spent tending a dying man, sleeping in a chair, watching breath fade hour by hour. He nods thoughtfully. He has seen this before. The term, he says, is nervous exhaustion. The cause? Overindulgence in grief. Too much feeling, allowed to fester. A woman must mourn, of course. But not excessively. Not so loudly. Not so bodily. It is unseemly. Dangerous, even. He prescribes a rest cure. No social reading. No long walks. No talk of death. Light broths. Tinctures. And, of course, bromide, just a small dose, to calm the nerves. Eleanor drinks the bitter draught each night. Her limbs grow heavy. The dreams become foggier. She stops crying, not because the sorrow is gone, but because her tears no longer find a path out. The house grows quieter. Visitors dwindle. Even her sister-in-law comes less often. Soon, Eleanor is alone. She sits by the hearth in the late afternoons, the gaslight flickering overhead, a shawl draped over her shoulders though she is not cold. Sometimes, she hums old lullabies to no one. Sometimes, she holds conversations aloud with her husband, her words drifting into the silence like dust. The doctor returns and calls it progress. He notes the absence of panic, the reduction in complaints. He declares her stable. But inside, she is simply still. Not at peace. Not healed. Just quieter. Because in Victorian England, a woman's grief is allowed, but only if it remains beautiful. Poetic. Contained. If it spills, if it disrupts the order of the room, it must be treated. Tamed. Doctors publish articles on hysterical melancholia. They catalogue symptoms: sudden weeping, heart palpitations, refusal to eat, fits of panic. Not as signs of trauma or despair, but as pathology. As evidence of faulty nerves. Weak constitutions. Sensitive dispositions. They never consider the world might be the illness. That to be a widow is not just to lose a husband, but to lose one's status, one's future, one's safety. They do not measure the violence of loneliness. Or the way silence sharpens like a blade when held for too long. Eleanor stops wearing her veil after the first year. She wears gray now, half mourning, half forgotten. When she walks to the apothecary, she keeps her head down. People say she is improved. She smiles when they say it. A small, tight smile. The kind worn by someone who knows the rules of the play and delivers her lines on cue. And still, some nights, when the laudanum wears off too soon and the wind rattles the panes just so, she sits up in bed, clutching her chest. The pressure returns. The invisible weight. The feeling that something inside her is about to burst. But she does not call for help. She breathes. Slowly. Quietly. And waits for it to pass. Because grief, in this century, is not meant to be heard. It is meant to be endured. In silence. In silk. In stillness. Paris, 1880. At the Salpêtrière Hospital, the great iron gates creak open each morning to let in the curious. They come not for healing, but for spectacle. Not for science, but for theater. Inside, past the shadowed wards and echoing halls, is an amphitheater. Wood-paneled. Lit by gas lamps. Seats arranged in rows, steep and narrow. And at its center, under bright light, stands the neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot. He wears his black coat like a judge. His voice cuts through murmurs like a blade. Before him lies a chaise, and on it, a woman. Her name is Augustine. She is 17. And she is here to perform her illness. Charcot calls it hysteria. He studies it, classifies it, demonstrates it. The room fills with doctors, students, society ladies in feathered hats. They lean forward as Augustine trembles, arches, contorts. Her eyes roll back. Her fingers twist. Her breath hitches in gasps that sound both holy and horrific. Charcot narrates the symptoms like an opera conductor. Phase 1, he announces, the epileptoid. Then, Phase 2, the clownism, muscular contortions. And finally, Phase 3, the hallucinatory ecstasy. The audience takes notes. No one asks Augustine what she feels. No one wonders how she came to be here. She had once been a maid. Quiet, quick-handed, too clever by half. Her master caught her reading his books. Later, he caught her by the wrists. And when she broke a vase during a panic and screamed until her throat bled, they brought her here. To Salpêtrière. To the asylum that poses as a hospital. Charcot considers himself a man of reason. A pioneer. He has cast off demons and phantoms. He deals in nerves, in muscles, in reflexes. But his lens is still a mirror, and what he sees in women is what the century wants him to see: weakness, excess, mystery. He believes hysteria is a neurological disorder, a kind of short circuit in the female brain. He studies the body, but not the story. And so Augustine is examined, prodded, photographed, pinned in place like a specimen. Every episode catalogued. Her face becomes iconic. Her spasms, repeatable. Charcot's lectures make him famous. The medical journals praise his clarity. But in the asylum corridors, the women whisper a different truth. They talk of the injections that cause their limbs to shake. They talk of being told when to faint, how to scream. They talk of how performing madness is the only way to be seen. And sometimes, it works. Sometimes, feigned obedience earns an extra piece of bread, or a walk in the garden, or a letter delivered without being read. Other times, they forget where the act ends. Augustine no longer knows if her fits are real. Or if they ever were. She dreams in flashes, bright lights, cold hands, the heavy lens of the camera. A white sheet pulled tight. Applause from strangers. Her own name lost beneath the Latin of diagnosis. At night, she traces the cracks in the wall with her eyes, like constellations. She wonders what might have happened if someone had listened, not measured. Asked, not labeled. Touched her hand without a needle in it. But the world does not want her healed. It wants her displayed. Displayed in photographs, ghostly and blurred. Her hair loose. Her limbs twisted in holy agony. Doctors pin these images to lecture walls like saints in stained glass. Students memorize her poses. Her body becomes language. A silent, screaming textbook. She is not the only one. Louise, Blanche, Marie. Names spoken only within the wards. Outside, they are numbers. Case studies. Footnotes in textbooks written by men. Charcot retires soon after, hailed as a genius. His ideas ripple across Europe. Freud will one day sit in the same chairs, taking notes. Others will follow. The body will give way to the mind. The asylum will evolve into the clinic. The performance will shift from stage to couch. But Augustine? She disappears from the records. One final file notes her escape. She climbed a fence in the night and vanished into the Paris fog. No one looked for her. No one asked where she ran. Perhaps she returned to a life that forgot her. Or perhaps she lived free, if only for a while, unobserved, unprescribed, unknown. Because sometimes healing is not silence or obedience. Sometimes healing is leaving. Sometimes it's not being seen at all. And in a world that placed her on stage, catalogued her cries, and claimed her as a theory, her escape was the only diagnosis that ever truly belonged to her. Vienna, 1896. The room is warm. Heavy drapes hush the windows. Thick carpets muffle footsteps. A low fire crackles. And at the center of it all stands a couch, not regal, not ornate, just long and upholstered, inviting silence. This is not a doctor's office. It's a stage for memory. And the man behind the curtain is Sigmund Freud. He does not wear robes or carry tinctures. He does not bleed or bind. His tools are far quieter, a notepad, a chair, and time. Across from him, reclined on the couch, lies a woman in her 30s. Her name is kept private, as are her dreams. She is not shaking. She is not screaming. Her dress is neat, her hands folded. And still, she is not well. She suffers from headaches, paralysis in one hand, bouts of weeping. She says her throat sometimes closes, as if words lodge in it like stones. Doctors have called it hysteria, prescribed tonics, electricity, ice baths. Nothing worked. Freud listens. He listens for hours. And then he asks her to speak. Not about her symptoms, but about everything. Her childhood. Her fears. Her dreams. The way her mother looked at her when she spilled milk at age 5. The moment her brother drowned. The time she laughed at a funeral. It feels strange at first. Indulgent. Nonsensical. But then, something begins to shift. Memories surface. Words loosen. The pain in her hand fades when she recalls the letter she never wrote. Her throat unclenches as she names the man who betrayed her. Her body, it seems, has been speaking the things her mouth would not. Freud calls it the talking cure. It is not magic. It is not swift. But it is different. He proposes a theory, that hysterical symptoms are not signs of disease, but of stories untold. That the body holds memories the mind tries to forget. That repression is not absence, but pressure. He says hysteria is not madness. It is meaning, misdirected. And for a brief moment, the world listens. The salons of Vienna buzz with his ideas. Educated women, readers, thinkers, wives of professors, begin to arrive quietly at his office. Not because they are mad, but because they are exhausted. Because their sorrow is too complex for prescriptions. Because no one else ever asked why. They lie on the couch and speak, and weep, and sometimes laugh. They uncover childhood wounds, forbidden desires, suppressed fury. They name things they were taught not to name. It is not always elegant. It is often painful. But for some, it brings relief. Freud writes feverishly. Essays, case studies, letters to colleagues. He maps the mind into layers, conscious, unconscious, ID, ego. He draws diagrams. Dreams become texts. Slips of the tongue become signals. The couch becomes a portal. But the deeper he digs, the more tangled it becomes. Desire. Trauma. Taboo. He begins to believe that hysteria is rooted in the sexual. That every symptom is a signal of buried impulses. That women's ailments are not mysterious, but eroticized echoes. Not all his patients agree. Some begin to feel dissected again, only now with language instead of scalpels. Some accuse him of twisting pain into theory. Some walk away. And yet, the couch remains. It becomes an icon. A new church for the modern soul. In America, his ideas are met with skepticism, then fascination. In London, his lectures draw crowds. By the turn of the century, psychoanalysis becomes a movement. A method. A mirror held to the human mind. But somewhere, beneath all the papers and parlors and debates, lies something quieter. The possibility that a woman's voice, uninterrupted, might be medicine. That pain, when spoken, changes shape. That the story itself matters. One winter morning, Freud steps into his office and finds the fire already lit. His next patient is waiting. She rises, nods, and lies back on the couch. She is not trembling. She is not silent. But she is tired. And when he asks, "Where shall we begin?" she does not hesitate. She begins. Because even if he misnames her sorrow, even if he misunderstands the ache, he listens. And for now, in this moment, that is enough. New York State, 1908. The Hudson Valley stretches wide and hushed, its forests heavy with mist, its lakes smooth as glass. And tucked among the hills, behind stone walls and trimmed hedges, sits the White Pines Sanitarium. It looks like a hotel. Tall windows. Grand porches. Rocking chairs arranged just so. The air smells of pine and distant lilac. Birds sing in the rafters. Patients wear linen. Nurses wear smiles. The brochures call it a retreat. A refuge. A place to rest the nerves. But rest is rarely simple. The women who come here are not screaming. They do not tear at their clothes or babble nonsense. They are quiet. Pale. Too tired to argue, too sad to explain. They are schoolteachers, widows, painters, wives. Each has been told, in gentle tones, that she is unwell. The diagnosis is always vague. Neurasthenia. Fatigue of the nerves. Emotional overstimulation. Sometimes, simply, a case of feminine collapse. Eleanor, age 42, arrives in spring. She is a music instructor. Her hands shake when she tries to play. Her thoughts come slow and fogged. Her family doctor advised a rest cure. No strain, no stimulation, he said. Just quiet. Just time. And so here she is. Day 1, orientation. A nurse in a pressed uniform explains the rules with a practiced gentleness. Wake at dawn. Walk at noon. No newspapers. No letters. No visitors for the first 2 weeks. Conversation discouraged. Stimulation, they say, is the enemy. Day 3, Isolation. Eleanor is shown to her room, sparse, sunlit, sterile. A bed, a chair, a basin. The window is locked. The door clicks softly when closed. Each meal is brought on a tray. Broths. Soft bread. Stewed fruit. She is encouraged to eat slowly, in silence. Her pulse is recorded. Her sleep charted. If she stares too long out the window, the nurse makes a note. Week 1, the walks begin. Always the same gravel path, 10 minutes, supervised. She is told not to engage with other patients. Rest is individual, says the doctor. Healing is internal. The doctor visits each Thursday. He smiles. He asks if the dreams persist. If the sadness has changed color. He says her hands tremble less, though she has not touched the piano. He prescribes more milk. A mild sedative. A bath in eucalyptus water. She complies. Because resistance is exhausting. By week 3, her world has narrowed. No books. No letters. No music. The quiet is no longer peaceful, it is pressing. Heavy. Every tick of the clock grows louder. She begins talking to the mirror, not for vanity, but to hear another voice. Sometimes, she hums. Just a note or two. Then stops, afraid she'll be reprimanded. One afternoon, she sees another patient in the garden. A woman in her 60s with bright eyes and a faded ribbon at her collar. The woman glances at Eleanor. Smiles. Lifts her hand to wave. A nurse intercepts. No talking, she reminds them. Healing must be orderly. Predictable. Still. But beneath the manicured calm, unrest simmers. Some patients whisper behind closed doors. They hide scraps of poetry in their pillowcases. One smuggles in a newspaper and reads it by moonlight. Another carves words into the underside of her bed slats. I am still here. Eleanor begins to write, secretly. Bits of melody on the backs of medical forms. Phrases that come unbidden, fragments of herself. She hides them beneath the mattress. Her symptoms, oddly, begin to ease. She laughs once, softly, when a squirrel startles a nurse. She remembers a childhood tune and hums it through a shower of spring rain. She dreams in color again. The doctor calls it progress. He increases her walking time. He recommends a follow-up stay, perhaps 3 more months. Eleanor nods. But she is already packing. She will leave at dawn. She doesn't know what waits beyond the gates. Only that silence is no cure when it's imposed. That tranquility becomes control when used to erase complexity. She has rested. She has obeyed. And now, she will begin to move. France, 1917. The trenches are carved into the earth like scars. Mud walls, sandbags, wire. Rain turns the soil to glue. The air smells of metal, mildew, and something far older, fear. The war was meant to be brief. Instead, it devours. In a clearing behind the lines, a soldier named Thomas sits shaking beneath a tarp. His uniform is soaked, his boots caked in filth. He is 24. His hands twitch against his thighs, though there is no enemy in sight. His mouth moves, but no words come. His captain says he's lost his nerve. The medic says, hysteria. They send him back, past the trenches, past the carts of bandaged men, to a field hospital with white sheets and clipped voices. A doctor greets him with a clipboard, not a handshake. They call it shell shock. A fashionable term. Clinical, contained. It implies cause, explosions, noise, pressure. A mechanical injury to the mind. But for Thomas, it is not a single shell. It is months of seeing men vanish mid-sentence. Of stepping over ribs like branches. Of hearing his own name screamed by the dying. At night, he wakes clawing at his throat. In the day, he stares at a spoon as if it holds secrets. They assign him to rest therapy. Warm milk. Writing exercises. Walks through tidy courtyards. But healing does not arrive with order. One afternoon, a nurse brings a phonograph. A Strauss waltz lilts through the ward. Several patients smile. Thomas does not. He curls in on himself, covers his ears. The music sounds too much like screams. The nurse reports it as resistance. Another doctor enters. He wears spectacles and speaks with calm authority. He asks Thomas to describe what he saw. Thomas opens his mouth. Nothing. The doctor sighs. Perhaps hypnosis, he suggests. Or isolation. In another ward, a different man stutters uncontrollably. One has lost all speech. One cannot stop weeping. Another repeats the same prayer for hours. They are not cowards. They are not mad. They are simply broken in ways language cannot always name. And still, something shifts. Because these men are not women. This, suddenly, is not called hysteria. It is called trauma. And though many doctors still reach for electric shocks and ice baths, a few begin to listen. One physician, Dr. W.H.R. Rivers, experiments with something different at Craiglockhart in Scotland, empathy. He listens to the war poets. Men like Siegfried Sassoon and Wilfred Owen describe horror not as madness but memory. He understands that what has shattered is not their courage, but their sense of what is human. The body recoils when the world loses its meaning. For generations, hysteria was gendered. A woman's affliction. A diagnosis that silenced. But now, when the same symptoms appear in uniformed men, the story changes. The body is no longer betraying reason. It is bearing witness. Yet, not all are offered that dignity. Back in London, thousands of women serve as nurses, ambulance drivers, telegraph operators. Some begin to suffer too, tremors, sleepwalking, fugue states. But theirs is still called nerves. Female frailty. Hormonal instability. No parades for their wounds. No poetry for their pain. And so the old pattern remains: men suffer from history. Women, from themselves. Thomas is discharged in late autumn. He walks with a slight limp, though he was never wounded. He flinches when carriages pass too fast. He avoids crowds. He carries a pocket watch that no longer ticks, a relic of a friend buried in the Somme. When people ask how the war was, he smiles. Loud, he says. Sometimes, when he sleeps, he sees a boy sitting in the mud, clutching his own hand, not realizing it's gone. And when he wakes, breathless and sweating, no one calls it hysteria. Not anymore. But Eleanor, back at home, who weeps in silence when her brother's name is read at church, she is told she's fragile. Emotional. Overly attached. Her pain remains private. Uncoded. Unnamed. Because even as medicine shifts, the hierarchy of suffering lingers. The soldier's tremble is trauma. The widow's tremble is weakness. And though the diagnosis changes, the cure remains elusive. Because healing requires not only care, but recognition. And not all wounds are loud. Some wear dresses. Some sit quietly in church pews, biting their tongues while the bells toll for someone they cannot bury. Washington, D.C., 1942. The waiting room smells like wax and ammonia. Pale walls. Steel-framed chairs. A woman clutches her purse in both hands, staring straight ahead. She is 32. Her name is not important, not here. What matters is her diagnosis: chronic agitation, irrational episodes, nervous decline. She has cried too often. She has shouted once, in public. She has forgotten to smile. And so her husband, concerned and well-meaning, brings her here. To the office of Dr. Walter Freeman. He arrives wearing a white coat, but no surgical gloves. He does not believe in anesthesia. He believes in boldness. Efficiency. Progress. His patients call him the lobotomist. He calls them miracles. The woman is led into a side room. She is asked to lie down. A nurse places a hand on her shoulder. Dr. Freeman produces a long, thin instrument, shaped like an ice pick. It is, in fact, an ice pick. Polished. Reassuringly simple. He lifts the woman's eyelid, positions the pick at the top of her eye socket, just beneath the brow. He counts aloud. 1. And drives it in with a small hammer. The bone behind the eye is thin, like eggshell. The pick pierces the skull and slides into the brain. A quick flick of the wrist. Then another. A severing. He repeats the procedure on the other side. It takes less than 10 minutes. No incision. No blood. Just stillness. Afterwards, the woman is taken to recovery. Her husband waits. In an hour, she will open her eyes. Her pulse will be steady. She may smile. Or not. She will likely be quieter. Less volatile. More manageable. Dr. Freeman records it as a success. In the 1930s and 40s, lobotomy spreads like a whisper of salvation through psychiatric wards. Depression? Lobotomy. Schizophrenia? Lobotomy. Anxiety, aggression, insomnia, homosexuality, grief, rebellion? Lobotomy. The procedure is fast. Cheap. Easily repeated. It promises order in a world unraveling from war and fear. By 1950, over 20,000 Americans, many of them women, have undergone the operation. Some institutions perform dozens per week. Parents bring in unruly daughters. Wives bring in sleepless husbands. Doctors bring in anyone who won't comply. Patients rarely say no, because many cannot. In asylums, consent is a luxury. Many are signed in by family. Diagnosed in vague terms: mood disorder, disobedience, unladylike conduct. They are told this will help, that it is modern, that it works. And for some, it does. They emerge calmer, less panicked. Their moods smooth like glass. But the cost is silence. They forget names, words, how to play the piano, how to argue. They forget how to cry. One woman, a teacher, returns to her home after the operation. She folds laundry. She smiles at the cat. She no longer writes poetry. She forgets why she stopped. She forgets she ever did. The world calls her stable. Her students call her vacant. But no one asks how she feels. Because now, she feels less. Dr. Freeman tours the country in his lobotomobile, a station wagon packed with tools. He performs demonstrations in hospitals, at conferences, sometimes even in hotel rooms. He believes in accessibility. He believes in the knife. He does not believe in regret. In 1949, Antonio Egas Moniz, the originator of the lobotomy, wins the Nobel Prize in Medicine. The world applauds. The silence of patience is mistaken for peace. But behind closed doors, stories begin to emerge. A girl named Rosemary. She was Kennedy's sister. She had moods. Highs, lows. Some said she was difficult. Some said she was vibrant. At 23, her father ordered a lobotomy, without telling the rest of the family. Afterwards, she could no longer speak clearly. She shuffled when she walked. She spent the rest of her life in a care home, forgotten. By the 1960s, new medications arrive: tranquilizers, antidepressants, chemical solutions for mental storms. The scalpel loses its throne. The ice pick is returned to the drawer. Dr. Freeman dies alone, his legacy unraveling. But the silence remains. Thousands of patients, their files marked successful, vanish into quiet homes, dim rooms, institutions. Their stories blur. Their words fade. Because no one measured what was lost. Only what was quieted. New York City, 1973. The room is not a clinic. There are no white coats, no syringes, no locked doors. Just folding chairs, second-hand rugs, a kettle whistling on the stove. A small poster on the wall reads, "The personal is political." 6 women sit in a loose circle. They are not patients. They are not ill. They are survivors, writers, organizers, each carrying a story once dismissed as nerves, as hormones, as something best kept private. Now, they speak. I was told to be grateful I didn't have to work. They called it anxiety, but I was just exhausted. My husband said I was overreacting when I cried every morning for a year. They are here not for diagnosis, but for reclamation. Because for centuries, their pain was archived under someone else's language. But this time, the narrative is theirs. Across the United States, women gather in living rooms and libraries, church basements and college lounges. The women's health movement is taking root, and with it, a radical idea: what if you are not the problem? What if the system is? Books like The Female Eunuch, Our Bodies, Ourselves, and The Second Sex are passed hand to hand, underlined, dog-eared. They expose the history of diagnosis as control, how hysteria, melancholia, and neurosis have been used as nets thrown over dissent. Doctors begin to take notice. Some resist. Others listen. One psychiatrist, Dr. Phyllis Chesler, publishes Women and Madness in 1972. She writes, "What we have called mental illness may in fact be a healthy response to an unhealthy environment." Her words land like a thunderclap in the halls of psychiatry. Suddenly, madness has context. Depression becomes grief unacknowledged. Anxiety becomes survival instinct honed too sharp. Rage becomes resistance. The asylum fades, replaced by outpatient clinics, group therapy, community support. But the legacy lingers. Women still find themselves overprescribed, underheard, dismissed when they say, "I'm not okay." But they begin to answer back. In 1979, the feminist poet Audre Lorde writes, "Your silence will not protect you." And thousands believe her. One woman, Maria, found herself institutionalized at 21 for unstable moods. She was given lithium, electroshock, cold baths. 10 years later, she writes a memoir. Not as a case study, but as testimony. She writes not for doctors, but for other women. Because story, now, is medicine. In San Francisco, lesbian activists form mental health collectives. In Chicago, black feminists publish essays linking medical racism to psychiatric neglect. In Boston, survivors of forced institutionalization gather to demand accountability. And slowly, language shifts. Victim becomes survivor. Crazy becomes stigmatized. Diagnosis becomes narrative. Therapy changes, too. It's no longer just about pathology. It's about power. Lived experience. Cultural weight. Therapists begin asking different questions. Not, "What's wrong with you?" but, "What happened to you?" Even the DSM, the Psychiatric Bible, is rewritten. Hysteria vanishes from its pages in 1980. It doesn't mean the harm is undone. It means the story is no longer frozen. For centuries, a woman's silence was taken as proof of illness. Now, her speech is the first step of healing. And sometimes, it's messy. Loud. Furious. But it is hers. Today, in a small studio in Brooklyn, a woman speaks into a microphone. She hosts a podcast called Soft Resistance. She shares her history of postpartum depression. Of being told she should snap out of it. Of fearing she'd break something, herself, her baby, the mirror on the wall. She laughs, gently, as she speaks. Not because it's funny, but because she survived. She ends the episode with a line from Lorde: "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." Somewhere, a young woman hears it through her headphones on a late train home. And maybe, just maybe, she will sleep easier tonight. Not because the world has changed completely, but because, for the first time, she sees herself not as unstable, but as unbroken. A flickering television screen, 1988. A woman stares into her reflection. Her hair is wild. Her eyes are wide. Strings swell beneath her voice as she whispers, "I'm not crazy," but we don't believe her. The music says otherwise. The camera lingers too long. We've seen this before. In thrillers, dramas, courtroom procedurals, madness plays out as spectacle. The unhinged ex-girlfriend. The jealous wife. The woman in the attic. In pop culture, mental illness is not complexity. It's chaos. Danger. Plot twist. It sells tickets. It wins Emmys. And slowly, insidiously, it becomes familiar. From Fatal Attraction to Girl, Interrupted, the crazy woman becomes a trope, trimmed and stylized for maximum effect. She screams too loud. She loves too hard. She loses control. She becomes the storm. But always, she is alone. Rarely do we see her before the breakdown. Rarely do we stay after. Rarely is there a therapist, a friend, a history. Just the moment she snaps, and the mess she leaves behind. Madness becomes myth. And myths, as always, are about power. Because to reduce suffering to stereotype is to make it consumable. Safe. Entertaining. And somewhere, far from the screen, a real woman hesitates before asking for help. Because she doesn't want to be that girl. The one they warn you about. In Hollywood, mental illness becomes aesthetic. Dark eyeliner. Asylum walls. Scribbled journals. A twitch. A smile too long. And the worst sin? Inconsistency. One moment kind, the next violent. It's not a symptom, it's the whole plot. But stereotypes don't appear from nowhere. They are echoes of deeper fears. For centuries, a woman's emotions were feared, labeled, restrained. Now, they're packaged and sold. But the same fear lingers beneath. A woman who feels too much cannot be trusted. A woman who breaks must be punished, or saved. Even in comedies, the unstable woman becomes punchline. She's clingy. She's erratic. She texts too much. She cries during commercials. Her breakdown is something to mock. Her medication is something to hide. But in real life, there is no laugh track. And in silence, shame grows. Meanwhile, men with mental illness in film are often granted complexity. The tortured genius. The brooding artist. The soldier haunted by war. Their madness is noble. Tragic. Redemptive. Hers is dangerous. Irrational. Ugly. And so, the divide deepens. The screen tells us who deserves empathy, and who should be feared. But something begins to shift. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, independent films start peeling back the curtain. Prozac Nation. The Hours. A Beautiful Mind. These stories don't just show madness, they ask what created it. Trauma. Loss. Silence. Isolation. The women are no longer warnings. They are windows. And slowly, television follows. In 6 Feet Under, in treatment, BoJack Horseman, therapy becomes part of the plot. Characters take pills without shame. They struggle, relapse, recover. But the old tropes don't die easily. Even in 2023, headlines shout when a celebrity cancels a tour for mental health. Talk show hosts ask invasive questions. Comment sections whisper, "Is she okay?" Madness still sells, but rarely tells the truth. So artists take the mirror back. On Instagram, poets write about panic attacks in lowercase letters. On TikTok, teenagers roleplay therapy sessions. In indie games, players explore depression through dreamscapes and soft piano loops. Mental illness becomes story again, but authored by those who live it. And yet, representation is not redemption. For every honest portrayal, 5 more flatten the experience. For every show that shows therapy, another turns madness into murder. The balance is fragile. The work, unfinished. But we are no longer in the attic. We are on the stage. On the mic. Behind the camera. A young woman in Toronto writes a web series about anxiety. It's awkward. Funny. Real. She films it in her apartment with borrowed lights. Episode 1 gets 100 views. Episode 3 gets 20,000. Because people see themselves. Not as monsters. Not as tragedies. But as human. And maybe, one day, when a character cries in a bathroom stall, it won't be the beginning of a breakdown. Maybe it will just be Tuesday. The room is quiet. A phone screen glows softly on a bedside table. A woman lies awake, her hand resting on her chest. Her breath rises, falls. Outside, the city murmurs, cars sighing down wet pavement, the distant chime of an elevator, someone laughing 3 stories up. She's not crying. She's not unraveling. She's just still. For the first time in years, she doesn't feel like a problem to be solved. She feels like a person. It didn't come from a miracle. No sudden cure, no last-minute breakthrough. It came from something slower. Quieter. A doctor who listened. A friend who stayed on the phone. A book that said, "You are not alone." This is how revolutions begin. Not always in fire, but in recognition. A century ago, she might have been called hysterical. Diagnosed. Confined. Told her thoughts were dangerous, her grief excessive, her fear irrational. Today, she is given words. Tools. Community. It is not perfect. But it is possible. The world is beginning to ask different questions. In classrooms, students study the history of diagnosis, not as scientific truth, but as social narrative. They read about Freud, but also about the women he never heard. They learn that psychiatry is not neutral, that it grew from the soil of power, gender, race, control. And still, they hope. A generation raised on climate anxiety, digital overload, mass grief, learning to name their feelings before they calcify into shame. In clinics, therapists now speak of trauma as something held in the body. Of healing as nonlinear. Of the right to say no. Of care that is not coerced. Terms like gaslighting, boundaries, neurodivergence, once hidden in textbooks, are now whispered between sisters, scribbled on whiteboards, hashtagged in poems. In some places, women sit in circles and speak the truth plainly. I am tired. I am angry. I am afraid. I am still here. In other places, they go quiet, not because they are silenced, but because they are listening. Learning how to love themselves without apology. Learning that rest is not laziness. That feeling is not failure. And that madness, in its many forms, does not mean brokenness. It means unheard, unmet, unheld. But not beyond healing. Not anymore. Apps offer guided meditations. Podcasts talk about trauma while folding laundry. Online support groups bloom like wildflowers across forums and feeds. Therapy is still expensive, still scarce, but it is no longer shameful. At least, not everywhere. In villages, in prisons, in refugee camps, women still suffer without names for their pain. In countries where speaking out is punished, a girl writes her fears into the margins of a schoolbook. Her aunt once did the same. Change is uneven. Justice is late. But something has shifted. Because now, there are archives, of survival, of resistance, of truth. Memoirs. Memo notes. Instagram Reels. TED Talks. Essays in teenage journals. Murals on city walls. Each one says the same thing. We are not alone. Even the language is changing. Instead of mental illness, some say mental difference. Instead of coping, some say navigating. Instead of cure, some say integration. A woman can cry at her desk and not be fired. A girl can say she's not okay and not be shamed. A mother can ask for help and be believed. A patient can ask for a second opinion, and get it. There are cracks, yes. Systems still buckle. Stigma still lingers. But light gets in. Back in the bedroom, the woman turns over. She doesn't reach for her phone. She doesn't scroll. She closes her eyes, not to escape, but to rest. Because tomorrow, she will wake up with the same worries. But also, with agency. And that is enough. She is not a diagnosis. She is not a trope. She is not a warning. She is a revolution. And revolutions, real ones, don't shout. They breathe. They persist. They sing. Softly, at first. Then louder. Then in harmony.